have a career that's only made possible by current technology. As a millennial with a bachelor's degree, earned work outside of fast food scarce, so I created my own business. Essentially, I run an Instagram account that works as advertisement and go to parties and festivals and take pictures of myself wearing products that businesses have paid me to do so. I know that it's only really viable when I'm young and attractive. I'm saving up a ton of money for my future, and I love the opportunity to visit far off places for free. My most recent trip, I headed to New Orleans for Mardi Gras. I was supposed to stay in a 5-star hotel in the city, but when I arrived, I was told there was an electrical issue and there was no power. I was offered a full refund on my hotel room, however, as I didn't pay for the room. It wasn't of much use to me. I used my phone to browse other local hotels, planning on using my numerous airline miles to pay for it, but nothing was available due to the festivities. The concierge gave me the information for a few smaller hotels in the area that might have availability. The brochure for the Ursula Hotel showed a gorgeous building that was a lot older than the places I usually stayed. I called and spoke to the proprietor, who seemed thrilled at the prospect of having a guest. Tired from my trip and not having many more options, I grabbed an Uber and headed to the hotel. Outside was breathtaking. Victorian-style manor, painted a charming mint green with black and cream gingerbread accents. Although I spent quite a bit of time in 4 or 5-star hotels, I loved the quaintness of classical architecture. My disappointment with losing out on my suite faded as I entered the Ursula. Inside the lobby had an old Hollywood feel. Contrasting with the rounded pillars and turrets, the style was much more boxy. The floor was checkered with diagonal tiles. Black and white, sharp red features found their way into both the lobby seating and the panelling on the walls. At the counter stood a middle-aged woman whose style of dress matched the decor perfectly. She shined like a 20s Hollywood starlet in an ankle-length silk dress with a flattened neckline. Her hair was rolled into soft curls around her aging face, the old headband topping her off like a Christmas tree. I made my way to the counter with haste, eager to lie down for the evening. The woman introduced herself as Lady Elizabeth, an air of sophistication surrounding her as she spoke. She was every bit as hospitable as she was on the phone, stating that most of her clients were older people and locals, and that she was pleased to have a beautiful young woman staying the night. She even took my photo with an old Polaroid camera, stating it was for the brochure. I'll admit that I was flattered and quite charmed, making a mental note to make an Instagram post in the morning to give her some free publicity. We made our way up the main staircase and down a long hallway to a large suite. Not as large as I was used to, but still bigger than the average hotel room. Entering the room, I threw my bag atop the enormous bed's rippling silk covers and thanked Lady Elizabeth. As she left, I changed out of my travelling clothes and into some yoga pants and a t-shirt, eager to relax. The jet lag had me ready for an early night, even though my adventurous spirit longed to roam the city. I really do have a curiosity problem. In every hotel room that I enter, I check every nook and cranny for what I might discover, anything a previous guest might have left behind. Typically, I find the usuals: a Bible, toiletries, and stationery. A few times I found things a bit more interesting: novels left behind, a journal once, coins or jewellery, and of course the rare but always disgusting used condom. As soon as I'd changed, I started to snoop. Checked under the bed. Nothing. In the drawers of the bedside table were a Bible and a deck of playing cards that were worn and tattered. The dresser drawers were empty besides a few small pouches of potpourri. The last place to check was the closet. I turned the glass door knob to find it resisted. I turned it again, but it would not open. I was ready to give the door a firm tug when I heard a knock on the door. I opened it to find Lady Elizabeth holding an ornate teacup and saucer. "You're planning on staying in? What a nice cup of chamomile tea might help you relax." She smiled. "Oh, thank you. That would be lovely." I took the tea from her and set it on the bedside table. "Is everything to your liking?" she asked. "Yes, everything is wonderful," I responded eagerly. The room really was beautiful. The only thing is that the closet is locked and I'd like to hang up some clothing. Oh, the corners of her smile turning down for just a moment. "I have to admit, the hotel is my home, and I have limited space in my room, so I'm forced to use the closets as my own storage. There is a tension rod in the bathroom with a few hangers that you can use." I nodded, disappointed but satisfied with the answer. I thanked her again for the tea, and she asked if I'd be needing anything else. I told her that I was content and she made her leave. Curling up on the bed, I took a sip of the tea. It was warm and sweet and reminded me of being little, drinking sleepy time tea before bed. Pulled up my phone and started checking notifications that I'd missed while travelling, but didn't even make it halfway through before falling asleep. I woke the next morning, more groggily than usual. My eyes were crusted closed, I guess due to all the allergens in the room that I wasn't used to. I grabbed my toiletry bag and headed to the bathroom. Popped an allergy pill just to be safe and turned on the shower. As I undressed, I noticed something a bit odd. On my left arm, just in the crook of my elbow, there was a weird mark. It looked like a bug bite, a red dot swelling around it in a ring, but it didn't itch. I really hoped that there wasn't any bed bugs in the room. Took a warm shower, my eyes barely opening until I stepped into the chill air outside of the bathroom. I dried my hair, applied my contour expertly, and changed into a flowy dress, some wedge heels and a light jacket, knowing I'd want to take lots of photos. I met up with a few friends once I left the hotel, an old roommate who was staying with family, and a fashion blogger who was also in town for the occasion. We visited tourist attractions, ate at a wonderful little cafe, and of course joined the Mardi Gras festivities later that evening. By the time I went back to the Ursula, it was very late, and I was again exhausted and a little tipsy. I was surprised to find the Lady Elizabeth still awake and moving around the lobby when I returned. Somehow in the lighter glow of the evening lamps, she looked younger, the wrinkles around her eyes softer. She asked about my day and excitedly filled her in, before making my way upstairs to my room. Not long after I had laid down, Lady Elizabeth arrived, yet again with a cup of tea. I expressed my gratitude and said goodnight, taking a few sips of tea, falling asleep in my dress. The next morning I woke even more out of it than the day before, felt weak and drowsy, but contributed it to having not fully recovered from my jet lag, along with a slight hangover. I showered and dressed, moving slowly, but taking care to keep up my appearance. Grabbed a cup of coffee from the lobby's machine before hitting the town again. I again met up with friends, this time following a strict itinerary of places that I had contacted before making the trip. I went to a few local boutiques where I posted pictures of myself shopping for the items they paid me in. I took pictures of myself and my friends drinking espresso and eating king cake at some local bakeries and cafes. Later that night, the photo ops made their way to the bars and clubs before making my way back to the hotel. Lady Elizabeth was awake, yet again, bustling around the lobby. She'd done something different with her hair. It looked healthier, shining glossily as it draped over her shoulders. She expressed how tired I must be from all my activities. I had a surprising amount of energy, most likely due to all the caffeinated beverages. She scrunched her nose at that. She seemed disappointed that I was intoxicated as well. The young lady must get her beauty sleep, she insisted. I chuckled and nodded in agreement. I'll be asleep soon, Lady Elizabeth. She smiled at that, and sure enough, barely 10 minutes after I had entered my room, she was at the door with tea, yet again. I laughed and thanked her as she insisted kindly that I go to sleep soon. Set the tea down on the bedside table and sat on the bed, checking the notifications on my posts from earlier in the day. All of them were doing fairly well. I lifted the teacup to take a sip, got a whiff of something a little off. I frowned and put the cup down. Maybe all the drinks I'd consumed at the bar had turned my stomach sour. Bored and brimming with energy, the closet again caught my curiosity. I walked over to it, gave the door another tug, but it wouldn't budge. Inspiration struck me, my buzz making me bolder than I normally would be. I reached into my hair and pulled out 2 bobby pins. I'm aware that knowing how to pick a lock doesn't exactly look good for my character, but there's a perfectly reasonable explanation. In college I was constantly losing my key, but I almost always have pins, and I have the internet with me at all times, so I just started learning how to break into my own room. As the lock gave way, I turned the doorknob and opened the closet, gleeful at my success. It had been a while and I wasn't sure that I could still do it. I was disappointed, however, when I realised that the closet was empty. No clothing, no pirate treasure, nothing. I looked down at the ground to find the only thing worth noticing. A ladder. I looked to see where the ladder led, but I wasn't able to see anything other than carpet. A chill ran down my spine, a thrill of exploration urging me forward. I turned the flashlight on my phone and climbed down the rungs cautiously. As I descended, I was surprised to see how bright it was. I didn't need my flashlight at all as I neared the bottom. My feet hit the soft carpeting and I found myself in a hallway not much different from the one above. The only difference being a ladder leading down from quite a few of the rooms. I wondered if perhaps the hotel had been a speakeasy at some point. Walking down the hallway, there was a door at one end and 2 at the other, nothing in between. I made my way to the door at one end and tested the knob. It opened gently. Inside was a starlet's dream dressing room. A large vanity table, stocked with creams and powders and perfumes, brushes the beauty bloggers would kill for. On the mirror was a picture of a girl in her 20s. I'd have guessed it were Lady Elizabeth if it weren't for the age of the photo. Edges were crumbling and the photo was colourless. Along the walls were racks and racks of clothing. Every decade was represented here. Gowns and skirts, smoking jackets and fur coats. There were mannequins wearing gorgeous dresses and various different wigs. It was the most beautiful assortment of fashion history. The strangest thing was at the centre of the room, a bathtub that didn't look like it was hooked up to any pipes. I looked inside to find it stained red, most likely from rust. I took a few pictures, not really planning on posting them, but to show my friends. Everything about this was so odd. Leaving the vanity room, I continued to the other end of the hallway, where the 2 doors sat. I opened the one on the left to find a pile of suitcases. No, a pile is an understatement. This was a mountain of suitcases. My stomach turned. Why would Lady Elizabeth have so many suitcases? Perhaps they were things that people had left behind over the years? I exited the room rather quickly. I almost didn't have the courage to open the last door, but my curiosity won in a battle against my fear. Inside was an office. Shelves were lined with books. On the desk at the centre of the room I found a small rolled up case that looked similar to the one I used for makeup brushes. I unrolled it over the desk, gasping softly as I saw the contents. Inside was a small vial of alcohol and a baggie of cotton swabs, along with several needles of different sizes. I ran my fingers over the mark on my arm, noticing that it was right on a vein. I shivered, realization washing over me. Shaking hands, I rolled the case back up and picked up the journal next to it. The book looked old, leather-bound but cracking from wear and tear. I opened the cover, the pages smelling of mould. On the first page was a Polaroid of a beautiful girl, around my age. Next to it was writing, SBM, Type AB. I wasn't quite sure what the numbers meant, but I had an idea. I looked for the book. Every entry was exactly the same. Polaroid, dates, number, and a blood type, until an expiration date at the bottom. I found myself growing sicker and sicker flipping through the pages until I reached the final one. On that page there was an unfinished entry, only 2 dates, and a picture of myself. Listed with my entry were my initials, the date of my check-in, and the 2 days after, each with a number next to it. I don't think that I've ever felt that kind of fear that I did then, but adrenaline fueled me. I grabbed the journal before leaving, finding the ladder to my room and climbed back up. Once inside, I closed the closet door and pushed the dresser in front of it. I grabbed the necessities and made my way out of the hotel. I wanted to be quick, but I didn't want to alert Lady Elizabeth to what I knew. I took off my shoes to make steps more quiet and speed walked down the hallway on the balls of my feet, down the flight of stairs and through the lobby without looking back. The air outside was cold, but I didn't stop walking. I called my blogging friend and old roommate until one of them picked up the phone and begged them to come get me. As soon as they met me, I called the police. I gave the journal as evidence before having to tell them my story over and over again. I'm back home now. I took the first available flight after they released me. The police have refused to tell me anything else that they found out, other than the fact there is an ongoing investigation. I love my job and I love to travel, but I think that I'll be staying home for a while. Many years ago, a group of 12 of us teens went on a backpacking trip to Southeast Asian country during term break. Among the things in our itinerary, we had wanted to stay in a mini theme park casino hotel area situated high up in the mountains. Only thing is, we were bad at planning, to say the least. Pretty much just thought we could bunk anywhere, take any room in the hotel. We didn't book in advance. It was peak season unfortunately, and when we got there, no good hotel could accommodate us. In the middle of the night, carrying our large backpacks, we had to wander far from the lights of the main resort, down into the other side of the dark, desolated mountains. Other than the resort located at the very top of the mountain, there were very few people living there, nor were there many establishments around the areas of the mountain. It was dead quiet. The journey to find a place to spend the night at 11 PM was unnerving to say the least. The mountainous areas away from the main resort were completely devoid of life and tall trees surrounded us from all sides along the main path. Beyond these trees was an unmanaged dark forest, and pretty much no one ever went up into that forest. For obvious reasons, low human traffic in places other than the resort, the street lamps around this area were poorly implemented as well, and the entire area was pretty dark, mainly illuminated by the dim pale glow of the moon. We walked quite a distance in these conditions until we saw a large empty car park with a rather dilapidated hotel in the middle. There were what seemed to be a matter of large black char marks at the sides of the hotel, creeping all the way up from the 3rd to the 9th floor, indicating there had once been a relatively huge fire there in the past. On all sides of the car park you could see tall intimidating trees looming ominously, obscuring the light from the moon. The only light from that area came from the rundown hotel building, without any street lamps to illuminate the car park. Clearly, this area in general had been neglected for quite some time. The car park was desolate. In fact, there was only one dusty car parked near the hotel building. To be honest, some of us in the group were very apprehensive about staying here. Between walking aimlessly in the eerie silent woods, staying out in the cold of the night mountain air, staying in a, at the very least, hotel type establishment, the choice was clear. Either way, we would only be staying for 3 nights. What could possibly go wrong? The interior of the hotel was a lot less menacing than outside. Though evidently aged and slightly musty, professional smiles of the receptionist at the front desk assured us this was a functioning lodging space. We asked for rooms with the cleanest living conditions and they booked us in at the highest open floor, the 12th floor. For whatever reason, they told us that 2 of us had to be located in a room relatively far away from the rest, as they had patrons on that floor and there were insufficient consecutive rooms for us. It struck us as odd because the hotel seemed extremely quiet, and at times we wondered if we were the only guests. Nevertheless, we agreed. Me and a large burly friend decided that we would take the corner room for two, as we didn't care too much for games for the night and constantly interrupted sleep. The corner room seemed peaceful enough, and well, someone had to make the sacrifice after all. This roommate was the person in the group of 12 that I had known the least. He was a transfer student who had just joined my class at school recently. He was a religious foreign classmate from Africa previously. Older, and his habits, culture, etc. were all very new to us. There was much we did not know about what he did during the time before he knew us. That and his imposing stature, exotic, unfamiliar appearance, made it slightly more intimidated to be trapped alone in a dark room with. However, from my interactions with him, he seemed rather mild-mannered and quiet, so I was not opposed to sharing a room alone with him. "This hotel haunted?" one of my friends half-jokingly asked the receptionists. They paused for a moment, looked at each other, gave an ambiguous, polite smile to him, as if he had just told an inappropriate joke. The elevators were small, and could only fit about 9 people crammed side by side. Me, my roommate, and this other guy took the second lift up. Strangely, the lift stopped at the 6th floor on the way up, and what we saw when the doors slowly parted spooked us. The entire floor was pitch dark, the walls were charred, and everything was burnt black. It was clear that after the fire had devastated the level, no attempt to repair the damages had been put into place. The entire affected floors were condemned altogether. We peeked outside the elevator and there was not a soul in sight who had pressed the floor button, so we figured it must have been a glitch in the elevator system. It was a really old hotel after all. We talked about this with the other group of 9 who had just gone up. They mentioned that their lift, on the other hand, had mysteriously bypassed the 12th floor and stopped at an unnumbered floor just above, presumably what was once the 13th floor. Once the lift door opened, what they saw sent shivers down their spines. It seemed like the floor above held some kind of singular unit, right at the end of the corridor, perhaps what might have been an old presidential suite. The door right in front of them was completely sealed up from top to bottom with thick metal chains, bordered with wooden planks and stuck with spirit-warding amulets and Chinese talismans. The entire floor was dark, the only source of light being the creepy red candles lighted in front of the door. Clearly, the management of the hotel was greatly disturbed by whatever was in there, and had gone to great lengths to keep it from being unleashed onto the residents of the hotel. They said they had frantically mashed the buttons to close the doors and got down to the 12th floor. To be honest, contrary to all we had seen thus far, the 12th floor was not too shabby. The hallways were decently lit and cleaned, though there was a musty old carpet smell that filled the air. All in all, it seemed livable, unlike the nightmarish scene we had encountered on the 6th floor. Me and my roommate made our way to our unit, ironically numbered 1212, the end of the hallway next to the stairwell. Upon entering, a gust of unusually cold air engulfed us. The room was clearly worn out, with dark stains on the wall, heavy scratches on wooden furniture and creaky beds. The toilet, well, it was much worse. The mirror was slightly cracked at some areas, the faucet had heavy indented scratches, and we could have sworn we saw traces of long hair and what seemed to be residual dried bloodstains at the dry corners of the tub. It was a dreadful heavy feeling in the room, but neither of us knew why we felt like that. We had an early rest that night, and although the toilet's lights switched off mysteriously and the toilet flushed on its own in the middle of the night, we chalked it up to a faulty switch and continued sleeping. Nothing much happened that night. On the second night I had problems sleeping, having drunk too much energy drinks at the theme park that day, and stayed all the way up till 3 AM, lying in my bed playing with my handphone. If I recall correctly, it was at 3:16 AM that night things started to get weird. The TV suddenly switched on by itself with nothing but static on the screen, then turned itself off. The toilet door slammed repeatedly and the faucet sounded like someone was turning it on and off 3 times in a row every few seconds. Somewhere from behind the walls beside my bed you could hear the muffled whispers of a lady continuously uttering, "Where is it? Help me find it." That could have been guessed from the room beside. Despite all this, my roommate somehow managed to stay fast asleep, leaving me to face the horrors. Suddenly, everything stopped and the room was eerily silent again. I turned to look at my roommate, silently hoping for him to have been awoken by the ruckus so I had some company. No reaction. He was facing the ceiling, blissfully unaware of what was happening. 10 seconds of foreboding silence passed. Suddenly he turned towards me, eyes still closed, and said in a deep, unnatural, raspy voice, "I'll kill you." I stared at him in shock, half expecting him to jolt up. Nothing. Seemed like he was still fast asleep. Was he sleep-talking? I did not sleep that night. The next day, I complained to the receptionist that the next-door female neighbour was causing quite a ruckus at night and disturbing our sleep. The receptionist shot me a puzzled look and told me the neighbouring unit had been vacant for the past month. The last night was the worst. I did not have much problem sleeping that night as I was absolutely exhausted and dozed off at about 10 PM. At around 3 AM again, I suddenly woke up to the screech of furniture moving in a unit above and violent, frantic footsteps. I rubbed my eyes sleepily and wondered what all the ruckus was about. It was then that I saw 7 black figures in the room. 6 of them were standing around my roommate's bed, staring at him, 2 on each side of the bed. One stood at the entrance of the toilet facing the bathtub. This figure seemed to have its neck craned down towards looking for something on the ground. At that point in time I thought my roommate must have invited all our friends in or something while I slept. In my groggy state I did not pay much heed to the black figures. After all their attention seemed to be focused on my roommate. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Everything was eerily still. All of a sudden he started moving strangely. The bed sheets rustled wildly, and I realised he was actually slithering off the bed upside down, arms pulling his sleeping body along one at a time. On reaching the floor he plopped down motionless, facing the ceiling. Freaking out, I flinched. Immediately all the black figures rapidly swiveled around in sync. The figures had their attention on me now. They knew I was awake, they knew I had seen them. In tandem with the figures my roommate violently arched his back, head hanging upside down. With an erratic jerk he contorted it to the left where I lay. I was absolutely terrified. I knew I was cornered in this dark room. My only source of light was the tiny glow seeping through the gaps of the curtain. I could barely see where I was going. I'll kill you. I'll kill you. I'll kill you. He chanted these lines fanatically on the floor, arms and legs twitching wildly. His eyes were still shut. At that moment I turned my back, frantically searching for my handphone, hidden somewhere in between the pillows for some light. I'll kill you. A menacing whisper blew across my left ear, and I felt 2 cold hands brush my neck. I instantly jumped out of the bed in fear. There he was in the bed right behind me, head upside down, crawling up from the floor beside my bed. His hands were poised to strangle me, fingers outstretched in a tense and peculiarly inhuman manner. Lips quivered into a creepy grin. I dashed towards the main room light switch and flipped it on. In an instant the room was flooded with light. My eyelids slammed shut and I flinched for a second, adjusting to the sudden influx of brightness in what was a pitch-dark room just an instant ago. When I opened my eyes, the black figures were gone, and my roommate was sprawled out on my bed, asleep, completely ignorant as to the terror he was just a minute ago. I noticed that the rosary he kept by his bedside had snapped into little beads as well. I took a chair, sat down and watched him the entire night with the lights on, fearing he would start attempting to strangle me again if I fell asleep. Trying hard to stay awake, I whipped out my phone and began looking up the history of the hotel. Woman found beheaded in gruesome hotel murder, August 16th, 1998. 30-year-old lady violently beheaded by her husband with a chopper found missing from the hotel kitchen. Her body was found floating in a pool of blood in a bathtub with her head placed next to the faucet on top of the tub, eyes still wide open in terror, facing the door. Take a look at the pictures. One of them was a picture of the room taken from the outside. Never had seen 4 numbers giving me such a feeling of dread. Room 1212. It was our room. I glanced at the toilet door nervously and instantly felt a cascade of goosebumps rush down my spine. It was as if her gaze never left the door. Apparently, the arrested husband swears he had been sleeping that night and woke up suddenly to find his wife murdered, with his hands covered in blood, holding the chopper. No one believed him. Police ruled it a homicide. Till this day, my roommate has no idea at all about what happened that night. I told him he was sleepwalking and that I was playing games on my phone the entire night after waking up and not being able to sleep. My friends all know what really happened, but we agreed that keeping it from him was the best thing to do. We found out from the janitor before leaving that room that the unnamed floor was once the site of a traditional folk ritual that the hotel owners had organised in 1997 to ask for spirit help in boosting the ailing hotel business occupancy. Apparently the ritual went tremendously wrong, and all of the 6 mediums invited lost their minds and started decapitating each other with kitchen knives, smearing the entire room with blood. That year, a massive fire devastated most of the hotel as well. Unfortunate incidents finally stopped when they brought in a renowned temple priest to seal the room. Room 1212 was right underneath the sealed room. Happy Apocalypse Day! Diana greeted me cheerfully from behind the front desk. What now? I had been working at the Good Shade for several weeks at this point, and I had just started to become accustomed to all the things that go on. I could finally check in guests, and I was learning about the types of people that stayed in the hotel. Not all of them were bad, but most were terrifying. I was already starting to lose track of how many times a guest had smelled me. On the bright side, apparently my scent is delicious. Perhaps not the best compliment, considering it's probably something that would make me more likely to end up a victim. Diana didn't seem too impressed when she saw such a thing occur to me for the first time. A tall, pale woman had entered the hotel a few days after I started the job. It looked like death, literally. It was beautiful in a dark way, and I found myself compelled to walk up to her as soon as our eyes met. Long black hair cascaded down her back, matching in colour with her eyes. If the Grim Reaper was personified as a gorgeous woman, then that's what I was staring at. She was as tall as me. Surprising attribute considering that I'm 6'1". She leaned close to me as I came to a halt in front of her. Her lips hovered mere centimetres away from my neck. Her breath felt cold on my skin. I trembled due to the fear of what she may be, but also because I was suddenly awash with a deep lust for her. She laughed, a deep and alluring sound as she backed away. "You smell delicious, young man." She purred as she walked around me. I didn't trust my legs to walk, so I simply stared as she took long, graceful steps towards Alice. "Maurice, he's new. Don't play with the staff." Alice chastised her. "Shame. It gets lonely at the hotel." "No, it doesn't," Alice laughed. "You bring in more unregistered guests than anyone else. You keep turning people, and there won't be no one left to feed on." Abruptly, I felt a rush of desire leave my body, leaving only traces of fear. I walked hesitantly up to the woman, and Maurice glanced at me with a pout. "What if I get hungry?" The pout transformed into a smile, revealing her sharp, elongated canines. Alice sighed. "You know Smith provides for the guests, and I've already asked you once not to mess with our new staff member. Get out of his head." Maurice shrugged and broke her gaze with me. I stood there confused until she left with her room key. "Don't let the guests play with your head." Alice scolded me once Maurice was out of sight. "What do you mean?" I questioned, still confused about the encounter. "The desire. For teeth. She does it to everyone. Not real. You have to steel yourself mentally so that it's not easy for shades to get in your head." I nodded. "What about her teeth?" "You think mine are scary? Hers are just plain hideous, but almost equally as dangerous." I took what she told me into account, and have worked on locking down my brain since then. By the time Apocalypse Day arrived, I had a minor grasp on how to protect my mind. At the same time, I was plagued with nightmares of jagged teeth. I came into work that evening exhausted. The nightmares had made sleep nearly impossible. "Apocalypse Day?" I questioned with a yawn. "It's sort of a holiday at the hotel. I mean, if holidays meant a ton of extra work." She was vigorously typing things into the computer as she spoke. "That's the downfall of being in the hotel business though. It makes for an interesting night at least." I watched as she pushed chestnut-coloured hair away from her tanned face. She was pretty this way, short and curvy with dark green eyes. She noticed me staring. "What?" "I'm just not used to Diana yet. What was wrong with Alice?" "Nothing. I just needed to change bodies so I could move on undetected." She shrugged at me as though it was the most obvious thing in the world. "I'm not sure if I'll ever get used to Althea switching names and bodies. It was definitely confusing the first time she came in as Diana." I nodded in understanding at her explanation, but wished she would let me call her by a single name. She requested that I call her by the name of the body, that she wouldn't slip up around other humans. I doubt she ever slips up though. I'm pretty sure she just gets a laugh out of my confusion. "So, what exactly is this so-called holiday?" Got back on task, not wanting to be blindsided tonight. "Years ago, back in the time of Al Capone, there was a group of men who thought themselves demon hunters." Glanced up from the screen to make sure I was paying attention. Their leader led them to believe that apocalypse was imminent, brought them here on the claim that this hotel was run by demons. I listened intently. Her tone made it obvious that their visit to the Good Shade didn't end well. "Tell you the rest later." She cut the story short as two young men entered the hotel. "Hi, welcome to the Good Shade Hotel." She smiled sweetly at the new guests. "Damn, this place is pretty remote." The taller of the pair spoke. "Stumbled onto it by luck." We don't advertise much." The edges of her smile tightened as though she knew what would come next. "So is this the place where the massacre happened? You know where they died?" He asked casually as they walked up to the desk. I took in their appearances. They seemed almost normal. The taller guy sported short blonde hair. He had an arrogant air about him. The shorter one had dark hair, and he practically dragged the bags he was weighted down with. Didn't seem to be as thrilled about staying here as his friend was. "You need a room for the night?" Diana ignored his question. "Can you tell me what happened that night? The anniversary, you know. Those men came into this forest." The blonde ignored her in return. She rolled her eyes. "Do I look old enough to remember that?" "Fine, whatever. We'll take a room. Can we film here and in the area?" He sighed and gestured to the bags. "The other guests probably won't want to be on camera, but do as you want without bothering anyone. Names for the room, please." She was typing the booking into the computer as she spoke. "I'm Eric. My friend here is Tim. I'm actually doing research on a mass killing that hasn't been publicized." He leaned in like he was expecting this would get her to talk. "I take it that means you didn't come here because you found some sort of advertisement or invitation?" Eric simply shrugged, apparently annoyed by the lack of information Diana offered. He held out a keycard silently and gripped his hand when he reached for it. Only use the third elevator. Don't leave your room after 11 p.m. and enjoy your stay in room 217. She smiled. Her eyes seemed to turn into deep black pools as she stared into him. He yanked his hand away and began walking. Crazy. Come on, Tim. Let's go set up in the room. She frowned. Not long enough, she muttered under her breath. Tyler, will you make sure those two make it to the room okay? Third elevator only. The other staff aren't here yet. I nodded and quickly jogged to catch up with the men near the elevators. They were trying to enter the wrong one. Eric seemed frustrated, while Tim seemed slightly scared. Swiping your keycard will only work on the correct elevator, I told them. We moved to the third elevator, and I took a few of the heavy bags from Tim. As soon as we entered the elevator, Eric began speaking again. So, do you know about the massacre? He asked me. I'm pretty new here. You're the first person to mention it, I replied. He told the story as we made our way to the room. Apparently this occurred almost 100 years ago. Most of the story was small town rumour. A group of men had followed a preacher out into the woods. They believed he was leading them to stop the apocalypse. The tale goes, the men never came back and their families believed something in the woods had killed the entire group. No one knew where exactly the men had gone, and there has been conspiracy theories about it being a cult that committed a group suicide. Variations of the story included the men finding a haunted building and being tortured by malevolent forces, or the preacher turning on them and slaughtering the group. The only solid fact that Eric had was that this forest was the one where the men had disappeared. I nodded and made understanding noises at the right moments. This information seemed to coincide with what Diana had been telling me before. I helped them bring the bags into the room and was about to leave when a question popped into my head. Why are you filming at the hotel? This is the only place around for miles. No one has ever heard of it. Everyone who's come looking for answers has gone missing. When we stumbled upon this place, I figured someone here must know what's going on. Maybe, I muttered half-heartedly. Well, the people here know what's going on, I thought. Why else would they celebrate a holiday called Apocalypse Day? When I returned to the lobby, Diana gave me a curious look. Learn anything interesting from your fellow humans? I suppose. I shrugged, knowing she didn't plan on enlightening me any further. I didn't have much time to dwell on the fact that she was leaving me clueless yet again. Guests seemed to pour into the hotel in an endless stream. Human and shade alike came to stay. It wasn't uncommon to have human guests. People like to roam the forest and are always relieved to find that there's somewhere to rest. None of them remember the hotel once they leave. We have staff that make sure of that. Influx in guests was apparently due to the holiday. Half the human guests were out ghost hunting for the missing men, and I wasn't sure what about this day appealed to the shades. By the time we had gotten a flood of guests into the rooms, it was almost 11 p.m. I was entirely exhausted at this point and couldn't keep my eyes from closing as I took a seat behind the desk. I woke a short time later to the sound of a disagreement. You need to go back to your room, Diana said sternly. I was still half asleep and hardly heard the response from a familiar male voice. I stood, trying to collect myself, and saw a group of people enter the hotel. Diana noticed that I was awake. Take care of the guests. She barked at me as she took Eric's arm and led him away quickly. The group was made up of about 10 men, and they seemed angry. It only took a moment of them crying out for redemption upon demons before I recognised who they must be. I couldn't pinpoint which of them might be the so-called preacher. As they got closer, I faced a horrifying realisation. They were all obviously shades, and they were mutilated beyond belief. The sleeves dangled limply, lacking arms to fill them. It was a near sea of red. Blood splatter could be found in abundance on each of them. Eyeless sockets, mouths sewn shut, limbs snapped and mangled, and missing chunks of flesh. These men had been brutally torn apart. I was used to seeing awful things, but hadn't yet witnessed anything of this magnitude. I stood staring, absolutely shocked by the scene in front of me. The gruesome visual was paired with a soundtrack of enraged shouts. Demons, come forth. We shall end the bringers of the apocalypse. The night of your reckoning has come. My stupefied state was interrupted by the sound of elevator doors opening. A tall man in a pristine black suit came over and stood in front of the gruesome mob. My followers, welcome to the reckoning. He gave an eerie smile to the group, who responded by dropping to their knees. They sang out praises and gratitude. The man who stood before them was their preacher. By this point, a throng of guests had heard the commotion and crowded around the edges of the lobby. The humans were easy to distinguish. They bore panicked expressions and some even screamed at the sight. Other guests held on to them, kept them from running away. Friends, the man gestured towards the edges of the room. Let history repeat itself. Apocalypse Day has arrived. He laughed like a madman, and the room was suddenly chaotic. The shades descended upon the human guests, tearing them apart or dragging them away. The preacher ran through the room, laughing as his razor-sharp nails cut through his flock of mutilated followers. The men dissipated when he made the violent contact, but the blood and screams were not lost. The guests kept the sound alive as they tore each other apart. I was backed against the wall behind the front desk, shivering with fear. The guests had gone crazy. The place wasn't safe. I don't know how I could have thought I would get used to being around such murderous creatures. Suddenly, Diana was beside me. Blood dripped from her shark-like teeth and ran down her chin. She looked at me with curiosity, but her eyes were inky black pools. I shrunk away from her. She rolled her eyes at me. I had to take care of Eric, getting too aggressive while asking about the hotel. See, the festivities have started. I stared at her speechless, and she seemed to suddenly realize the depth of my fear. This is what the holiday is for. Cheat day, if you will. The guests go wild to celebrate the massacre. Not a great day for your kind, but you're safe. You're with me. I'll protect you, she said reassuringly as the darkness faded from her eyes, but the fresh blood dripping from her chin didn't make me feel any better. She hooked her arm through mine as we watched the brutal chaos around us. I couldn't help but feel afraid that she'd suddenly turn on me. I wasn't sure if she was safe to be near. As if the universe had set out to prove me wrong, someone clutched at my free arm and tried to pull me into the disaster. Diana bared teeth at the woman holding my arm. "This one is mine," she grilled in an unhuman voice. The stranger backed away, returning to the grotesque show. We sat there and watched until the violence died down and the guests had returned to their rooms. The lobby was awash with blood and bits of flesh, and I felt sick to my stomach. Diana patted me on the back as she stood. "Congratulations, you've made it for your first holiday. Your shift is being extended. We need to check in the morning to see how many guests we lost." I hesitated before speaking, unsure if my voice would work. "When people come looking for them? We have people to take care of that, and people to clean up all of this. Everything is fine. It's just another day at the hotel. You should get some sleep before we check the rooms in a few hours." I laid down on the soft couch in the office, but I couldn't sleep. I could never get the scene I witnessed out of my head, and I feared for my life now more than I ever had before. Just another day? How was this considered a holiday? I was so exhausted that I couldn't keep my eyes open, and I fell asleep to fearful thoughts. How was I supposed to stay sane when I had nearly 2 months left on my contract? How was I supposed to get used to their idea of holidays? I didn't understand how they could be so nonchalant about massacring guests. I felt a deep sadness for the human guests who had thought this hotel was a safe haven amidst a dangerous forest. This place might end up being the death of me, and every time something crazy like this happens, I flash back to the words I was told on my first day. "You'll see much worse, trust me." Those words still remain true. Apocalypse Day may have been violent and gruesome, but it wasn't the most terrifying night of the job.